Hey everybody, we're back with episode 5.3. This is just a quick update to the repo market and the QE or not QE that has started. You want to make sure not to miss the next episode. It's another two-parter. Kent and I take apart the Communist Manifesto and its 10 planks and map that onto the current system. But let's get into this quick update. See you on the flip side. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to AK Global. My name is Ansel. I'm here with my co-host Kent, the master of macro melange, and we are just doing a quick update on the repo market. So this is part 3 of our episode 5. We have 2 that we talked about more in depth on the repo market, and this is going to be an update because it's moving so quickly, and we're already in November or midway through November, and so we wanted to do an update to this. Just a note to the listeners. Wherever you're listening to this, all the links should be down below in the description or in the show notes so you can follow along with us. All right. Now that that's behind us, Kent, how are you doing? And you want to lead us into this?
Doing just fine. Preparing for the, I don't think it's a vortex, but going to get some cold weather up here in Omaha. It's supposed to be in the teens tomorrow morning.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But the sun's been out, so it's not as bad. I guess it just depends where people who listen to this, where they're at, because I'll be out jogging in it. So,
well, I guess if you can keep jogging, but I've seen some crazy people with those face masks on and they're jogging with slush on the ground. So I don't know, I guess people jogging anything.
Yes, sir. Anyway, let's get started here. So first, since we're going to be just doing a repo update, I think it's important, just a real quick description of what the repo market is. The repo market is basically a place where banks can go when they have liquidity needs, which just means when they need to borrow, like they have short-term obligations and they have cash needs, so they can go and they can trade treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities, things like that, for cash so that they can quickly meet those needs. Did I explain that well, Ansel? Do you have anything to add?
The only thing I'd add is the description or the distinction between overnight and term. So we have the Fed is offering 2 different types of cash injections or 2 different types of repos, and they are overnight, so you have to repay them the next day, or term, and those are going to be repaid usually 14 days out. So you can hold that cash for a little bit longer, but you eventually are supposed to repay those debts. So I would just add that to kind of description of what the repo market is. But let's jump into these different statements by the Fed. So you want to walk us through?
Yeah, the first statement that was issued by the Fed was the September 20th statement, and the effective dates for that statement were September 30th through October 10th. And so within that window, you had an option for $75 billion in overnight repos and $30 billion for 14-day repos. So about 2 weeks roughly later, we get another statement, which is on October 4th. The effective dates here were October 7th through November 4th. It stayed the same, $75 billion in overnight repos. However, with the term, there was initially just a 14-day repo, but they started offering these shorter term, like 5 or 6 day repos. Those were actually updated to 35 to 45 billion. So we had an increase there. And then finally, and this is most.
I just want to jump in here is to point out that before, so they're in their first statement, it was supposed to run through October 10th, but then on October 7th, so before that one even was supposed to conclude, they updated and increased and extended it right out to November 4th. So this was like they weren't getting enough bang for their buck. They had to extend and increase, which is not a good direction. But anyway, okay, continue with the next statement.
This is the most recent statement from the 23rd of October. This one is supposed to be valid from the 15th of October through the 23rd of October. The overnight repos being offered will be to the tune of 75 billion. From the 24th of October to the 14th of November, that will be increased or has been increased to 120 billion. And then the kind of various term repos being offered are still going to be from 35 to 45 billion. So the main takeaway here is that what we're seeing is an increase in the amounts of repurchase agreements being offered by the Fed.
This is another same direction move. So before the end of that second statement time period, they released a third statement that again extended and increased. And this is where we're at now. So we've had two almost like emergency things. Like, why don't they just wait till the end of that term and then decide to increase it? No, they're not doing that. They have their hand is being forced by the situation to extend and to increase before the end of their term. So that's pretty interesting.
Right. The plumbing is broken. There is a deluge of asset-backed, the mortgage-backed securities and the treasury securities kind of being offered up for cash. And so, again, this is kind of like when you have a sinking ship, you've got three holes and you've just got one deckhand down there trying to plug them all with his two hands. So there's not enough, I guess liquidity in the system would be the correct term, to plug the holes.
Okay, so then let's move on to the next section here is we want to talk about the difference here between submitted and accepted, because if you're going to look through these links that we're providing you in the description here, then you're going to see submitted versus accepted. And some of them are different. Most of them are the same, but some of them are different. And the difference here is submitted is what the banks are asking for. This is the collateral that they need to get swapped over to cash to meet their liquidity needs. And the banks, the central bank is looking at this collateral, and either they're going to accept it or they're not going to accept it. So if the amount submitted is over the amount accepted, that means that the Fed did not meet the demand of the banks. And that could be a bad thing. We don't know, because it's so opaque. We don't know exactly what is being submitted and by whom. So we just know that there's a shortfall here, that the banks are in need of more liquidity than the Fed is willing to accept. That's interesting.
The Fed is essentially, in addition to the repurchase agreements, also purchasing $60 billion worth of treasuries each month. They also like to emphasize that they're not calling that QE, Ansel, but as Michael Leibowitz said in his article, QE by any other name. And I'm just going to read a quick excerpt here. To help you form your own opinion, let's look at some facts about QE and balance sheet increases prior to the QE era. From January of 2003 to December of 2007, the Fed's balance sheet steadily increased by 150 billion, or about 30 billion a year. The new proposal from Sack and Gagnon calls for 250 billion in increase over 6 months. QE1 lasted 6 months and increased the Fed's balance sheet by 265 billion. Maybe it's us, but the new proposal appears to be a mirror image of QE. So the 60 billion in treasury purchases, in addition to the large amounts being exchanged in the repurchase agreements, really do appear to be QE again, even though Powell does not want to call it that. Ansel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to try to summarize this in like 2 sentences. So we have the repo, which is there's some crazy shit happening with the banks that they can't meet their bills. But we also have the Fed purchasing treasuries. And this is on top of the repo thing. And that's at 60 billion a month, which is a mirror image of what QE1 was back in the day. So we have these two, there's multiple tentacles of quantitative easing and monetary policy happening here. And it's really hard to untangle. But the bottom line, I'll keep going back to this. This is the only thing that's keeping this system running, is this intervention by the Federal Reserve, right? The market needs to cleanse itself. And by this not QE or whatever they're calling it, this is stopping this natural process, like the wildfires out there in California. They tried to do wildfire management, and I'm not an expert in what they try to do and all this, but I know they might do control burns or maybe just put out wildfires when they start. So it builds up, and then there's a huge wildfire. Well, that's actually healthy, right? You want to have a wildfire come through every once in a while and reset the clock. And that's kind of what the Fed is trying to avoid here. They're pumping in this liquidity to keep all that, like with so many different monetary policy strategies right now, all running simultaneously to try to keep this whole shit propped up. And it's not going to work, right? Eventually there's an uncontrolled wildfire, and that's what we're stepping into here.
An interesting point comparing kind of the increase in the quantity of money with the increase of kind of like deadwood and so forth that government in California does not allow people to burn away or to remove. So what you have is this excess buildup, which eventually causes massive wildfires. So that's kind of the thing in California is, and don't quote me, but I believe that.
Well, you lived there. You lived there for years, right? So you have some firsthand knowledge.
I am more native Californian than probably 90-something% of people living there. Our family came out there on wagons. My understanding of the situation is that because of environmental laws, when trees die, it just sits. They say, oh, you don't touch them. You're not allowed to touch them. You can't, clear them out or whatever. So they just build up, and then eventually, if there's like a lightning strike or a campfire ember or whatever it is, it catches these and it just burns. The disaster that follows is much larger. In the same way, the fact that we're allowing the Fed to just basically prop up these asset prices for this lengthy amount of time is just going to ensure that the collapse is much, much greater. They are not letting this was kind of like what we did on the previous episode. They will not let capitalism work. They're entirely hell-bent on making sure that a single entity tries to control the entire system. And so all we've seen from that are basically this boom and bust cycle and this shift from investment in productivity to this shift to investment in, I hesitate to call it investment, but it's just investment to juice asset prices.
Well, yeah, they think they're so freaking smart that they have been able to engineer an endless bubble. And that works great until the winds pick up to 90 miles an hour and these embers can blow miles and the contagion of the wildfire is all over the place. So it's coming. It's coming. I mean, you can't, you can maybe delay for a certain period of time, but eventually those winds will pick up and the fire will spread and you're fucked.
I'm loving these wildfire references. I mean, I can't really think of a comparison that's more apt.
It's got to end somewhere. It's like I go back to these geniuses think that they have this all figured out. But there is an end somewhere. The wildfire will start.
Yeah. And just one of the big things that I think is really important takeaway from all this is that you cannot print your way to prosperity. Unless the Fed unless the Fed can figure out how to mass 3D print houses, cars, shoes, food, et cetera, there is this whole wealth effect that they talk about is largely an illusion. It is not real. Again, real wealth is literally, the house you live in, your ability to, purchase groceries, education, clothes, you name it, like things that you need to survive. And all of those are just merely being made more expensive by this money printing. So in effect, you're actually becoming poorer. So again, unless they can print resources, unless they can print apples and pies and shoes and these other things, we are all worse off from what's going on.
Yeah, wealth is capital accumulation. And when you print money to finance making of capital, it distorts everything in the economy. that Bitcoin fixes this. We haven't been ending on Bitcoin stuff, I don't think, recently, but in this case, I mean, Bitcoin is hard money. It can't be inflated like the printing of money. And so it allows for better price discovery, better economic calculation, all of these things that have to do with accumulating capital over time. And so Bitcoin is a great answer to this. Of course, gold would be a better answer than fiat, but eventually fiat will lose.
Right. And the things that make gold a good money and what are going to make Bitcoin an even better money are the fact that they mimic reality. For example, apples. There is a process of planting seeds, erecting crops. It takes time and it takes labor and it takes machinery and there's all these cost inputs. There's time and a cost input in order to derive an output. With money, you have to have this same underlying feature. With gold, you have a mining process. You have capital that has to be injected into this digging into a mine to extract gold. In Bitcoin, the miners they're people that are using large amounts of electricity in order to increase the supply of Bitcoin. Both of those processes, both gold and Bitcoin, or the process by which their supply is increased, it takes time, it takes resources, and that's what's important here.
Yeah, the supply is limited by the difficulty or how hard it is to create more of those things. So yeah, that's very, very important to get the cost, to get the, I guess, capital structure throughout the economy, like how much is invested in this industry, how much is invested in that industry, where the capital has been accumulated. Is it in electronics or is it in mining or, whatever? And so to get this capital structure proper, you need to have some limit to the money. And if you could just print it, then there is no basis for building a capital structure that is sustainable. That's it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much. And we will see you in episode 6, which is on the Communist Manifesto. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this around so we can affect more people. All right. See you later.